We think we've got a drug that can slow aging and possibly even reverse it, which of course has been a desperate want of man since the start of history. So many different diseases correlate with aging, and there's a thesis that this correlation is because aging is a causal drive to them. So if you had a drug that could slow aging, it could actually have a therapeutic benefit for a huge number of different diseases. So within a single species, you can actually see that there's an inverse relationship between metabolic rate per unit mass and lifespan. So for example, humans with lower metabolic rate per unit mass live longer. And interrelatedly, humans with lower body temperature live longer, body temperature being a function of metabolic rate per unit mass. Now, people think that all humans have a resting body temperature of 37 degrees C. That's not actually true. There's actually quite a big range of over 2 degrees C between different humans. And to say again, humans with low body temperature live longer. So that's observational data within the human population. Now, looking at interventional data in mice, so making the metabolic rate of mice slower can actually make them live longer. And this inverse relationship between metabolic rate per unit mass and lifespan can be seen across species as well. In fact, it might actually be explanatory for why different mammal species have different maximal lifespans. So for example, a mouse has a very fast metabolic rate per unit mass, illustrated by its resting heart rate being between 800 and 900 beats per minute, and it only lives for 4 years, whereas a bowhead whale has a very slow metabolic rate per unit mass, with a resting heart rate of just 1 to 2 beats per minute, and lives for over 211 years. And to interpret the last two slides, metabolic rate enables life, but it causes damage, which is aging, which ultimately takes it away. And thus, reducing metabolic rate may slow aging and possibly even reverse it. In mammals, the majority of metabolic rate is for metabolic heat generation to keep the body at around about 37 degrees C. I've discovered the chemical reaction that mammals use to metabolically generate heat and a drug to specifically inhibit it. So a drug, as I've demonstrated in mice, that can reduce metabolic rate. Given all the aforementioned, I predict that this drug can slow aging. So you're probably thinking, yeah, that's fine, but surely less metabolic heat generation is problematic. Well, the thing is, if the ambient temperature is 37 degrees C or higher, the body doesn't actually have to produce any metabolic heat for the body to be around 37 degrees C. Metabolic heat generation in that case is actually redundant, it's not needed, and in fact, it's actually making the person uncomfortable. Reducing metabolic heat generation in that instance will actually make the person more thermal comfortable. And of course, there's many places in the world where the ambient temperature is in excess of 37 degrees for at least part of the year. And of course, this ambient temperature issue is only an issue when there's an effective amount of drug in the body. And this drug, like all drugs, gets cleared from the body in time. Going to number 2 there. Another thing you can do, less metabolic heat generation can actually be offset by wearing more clothes. Wherein modern clothing can be have incredible thermal properties, like permitting people to live in Siberia, for instance, at minus 40, minus 50 degrees C. Going to number 3 there, instead of applying the drug to all the body, like orally or intravenously, you can actually apply the drug topically just to only a small part of the body. So for example, to the eye, using eye drops, for example. And this method of use has no thermoregulatory issues. It can't reduce the body temperature. So for example, you apply it to the eye, it reduces the metabolic heat generation by the eye, slowing the metabolic rate of the eye, which I predict slows the aging rate of the eye. But the eye's temperature is maintained at around about 37 degrees C because of heat transfer from the rest of the body, especially via blood flow. In fact, one of the functions of blood flow is to move heat around the body. And this can have utilities for diseases of aging concerned with the eye. So for example, age-related macular degeneration. And this same principle can be used for other body parts as well. So for example, cosmetic utilities in an eye cream, for example. The drugs in an eye cream which you only administer to the skin around the eyes. So going to number 4 there, this is using the drug, administering it to the whole body, orally, for example, but wherein you only use a low dose of the drug. So if the ambient temperature is low, the drug can only ever cause a slight body temperature drop. And a slight body temperature drop actually confers an additional anti-aging mechanism, which we'll talk about in the next slide. Chemical reactions run slower at lower temperature. This is why food perishes slower at the lower temperature of a fridge and even slower at the even lower temperature of a freezer. Aging is at least one chemical reaction, so it stands to reason that it should go slower at lower temperature. And we actually see that in the data. So for example, if you make a mouse's body temperature 0.34 degrees C lower, you can actually make it live 20% longer. So as I said before, I've got a drug that I've shown can reduce metabolic heat generation in mice, slowing metabolic rate in mice, which I predict can slow aging. If the ambient temperature is low, the drug effect can actually reduce body temperature towards the ambient temperature dose dependently. Slight body temperature drop is safe and imperceptible and actually occurs during calorie restriction, which extends lifespan. And how calorie restriction does actually extend lifespan might be in part or in totality because it does actually cause a slight body temperature drop. So in some sense, the drug can be thought of perhaps as a calorie restriction mimetic. So as I said before, in the human population, there's actually a range of body temperatures, wherein people with lower resting body temperature live longer than those with higher. If you were to give the drug just to those in the population with a higher body temperature to bring their body temperature down to be within the range of the people with lower body temperature within the population. I've done the calculations, and if you were to do that to the US population, you could actually increase US life expectancy by more than 1 year, wherein increasing US life expectancy by 1 year by slowing aging has been calculated by economists to be worth $38 trillion US. To put this into perspective, if you were to cure all cancers, you'd actually only increase US life expectancy by around 3 years. So people with Alzheimer's actually have a pathologically elevated body temperature, which has been shown in corresponding mice studies to actually be a drive of the disease, wherein reducing body temperature can actually slow the progression of the disease. And you remember back that we've actually got a drug that can dose-dependently reduce body temperature. Now the thing is, showing that the drug can reduce the body temperature of Alzheimer's patients may actually be sufficient for clinical approval for Alzheimer's through this special program, the Accelerated Approval Program, where if you show a positive impact on a biomarker associated with the disease, that can actually be sufficient for clinical approval. Now, this aforementioned drug actually has anti-cancer activity as predicted, as designed, and actually greater anti-cancer activity in standardized in vitro testing than many present cancer drugs. So what we might have here is a cancer drug that instead of harming normal cells like present cancer drugs, actually helps them by slowing their aging, whereas most present cancer drugs actually accelerate aging. Clinical trials for cancer can be incredibly fast, especially if assaying against a cancer with a very poor prognosis, such as pancreatic cancer, where patients only live a few months. After a clinical approval for cancer, the drug can be trialed and or used off-label for age-related diseases and aging itself. Obviously, a drug that can slow aging has valuable cosmetic applications, which are close to market because cosmetics don't have to undergo animal or human trials. Corresponding patents have been filed in many different jurisdictions. Further information at request.